A forgotten shard hums with a secret melody. Ilara, a young apprentice stone shaper, found this piece of whispering obsidian deep within the workshop vaults. Its faint song pulled at her, a call that defied her master's stern warnings about the dangers of old magic. By the end of this tale, you will understand the profound mystery of the Palantri stones and why their echoes still haunt our world. What ancient hands forged these artifacts, and what hidden cost did they carry that keeps them whispering across the ages? I would love to know, wherever you are listening from, what the local time is for you right now. What do you believe is the true price of uncovering a lost power? The obsidian shard felt warm against Ilara's palm, its faint melody now a distinct hum. Under the cover of night, she laid out her stone-shaping tools, their polished surfaces catching the moonlight. With a delicate copper stylus, she traced the shard's shimmering veins, not carving stone, but following the current of its energy. To her astonishment, the energy did not fade. Instead, it clung to the air, weaving a delicate lattice of light that mirrored the constellations high above. It was a map, a silent chart of celestial patterns waiting to be read. This secret work could not stay hidden for long. Master Kalen, an elder whose eyes missed nothing, found her one evening not in the vaults, but in the main hall, her fingers still faintly glowing with residual energy. He did not shout. His voice was low, heavy with a warning that felt centuries old. Such artifacts are forbidden for a reason, Ilara. They are not tools to be mastered. They are echoes of a pride that broke the world. The tension in the air was sharper than any crystal. Here was the weight of tradition, the law of her order, demanding she abandon her discovery. Yet the shard's song had become a part of her own rhythm. To ignore its call felt like denying the beat of her own heart. The choice was a chasm at her feet. On one side stood exile, the unthinkable severance from the only home she had ever known. On the other, the suffocating silence of obedience, of never knowing what the stars were trying to say. She made her decision in the quiet of her room, the shard pulsing softly in her hand. Her research would continue, deeper into the shadows, and as her resolve solidified, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer a mere melody, but a chorus of urgent guidance, pulling her attention away from the stars and toward the oldest, most forgotten wing of the citadel. The whispers spoke of a hidden archive, a place of records lost to time. The stakes were no longer just about knowledge. They were about a truth so dangerous, it had been sealed away, and a power that was now actively seeking a way out. The archive door was not locked with any physical key. It was sealed by a ward of pure resonance, a barrier of silent sound meant to repel any who did not know the stone's true name. Ilara pressed her palm against the cold, smooth surface, the whispering shard in her other hand, humming in sympathetic vibration. She closed her eyes, letting the shard's song guide her, and she answered the ward's unspoken challenge with a single, perfect note hummed deep in her throat. The resonance shifted from rejection to acceptance, and the massive stone door slid sideways without a sound, revealing a chamber thick with the dust of centuries. Inside, the air was still and heavy. Racks of crystallized scrolls lined the walls, their surfaces shimmering with trapped light. She unrolled the first one, and the images within glowed to life, depicting the forging of the Palantri. It was not a story of mere craftsmanship, but of a sublime sacrifice. The first stone singers, in an age long forgotten, had not carved the stones. They had sung them into being from the raw essence of celestial bodies, harmonizing their own life force with the music of the cosmos to create conduits of pure understanding. They were meant to be a gift, a way to bind the world in shared knowledge and peace, but the scrolls told a darker chapter. This harmony was shattered in a conflict known as the Dissonance War. A faction sought to twist the Palantri, not for connection, but for control, to impose a single will upon the world's many songs. The stones, attuned to this violent new purpose, fractured under the strain, their perfect harmony broken into the desperate, fractured whispers Ilara now heard. The very act of reading this forbidden history triggered a silent alarm. A deep, resonant chime echoed through the archive, a sound felt more than heard. The stone around her began to hum with aggressive intent. She saw them then, the archive guardians, their forms coalescing from the walls themselves, figures of living granite and sharp intent. There was no time to think. She snatched the central scroll, the one that depicted the original, pure song of the Palantri, and fled. The door groaned shut behind her, sealing the guardians within, but she knew they would find another way out. She was a fugitive now, hunted not just by her master's disapproval, but by the Citadel's ancient, automated protectors. Her only hope lay in the margins of the very scroll she clutched to her chest, where a name was scribbled again and again, the name of an exiled scholar who was said to have continued the old research. To find him, she would have to descend from the lofty spires of the citadel and into the shadowed, forgotten places of the world. The world below the citadel was a landscape of broken whispers. Ilara followed the shard's pull through winding canyons and petrified forests, the scroll a heavy secret against her side. It led her to a cavern hidden behind a waterfall that fell in absolute silence, its roar swallowed by the stone. Inside, the air smelled of damp earth and ozone. Kale was there, a man whose posture was a monument to bitterness, his movements sharp as he tended a garden of glowing fungi. He did not look at her as she entered. "I have nothing left to teach," he stated, his voice like grinding stone. The citadel saw to that. She placed the whispering shard on a smooth rock between them. Its hum intensified, filling the cavern with a soft light. Kale flinched, his eyes finally lifting to meet hers. He had not heard that song in decades. It was Ilara's own determination, the unshakable truth in her voice as she spoke of the archive and the Dissonance War, that finally broke his resistance. "You carry the very problem in your hand," he sighed, gesturing to the shard. "The Palantri were never meant to be mere tools." He explained that in the first days, they were a covenant. Star weavers who read fate in the light of distant suns joined with earth singers who understood the deep, slow music of the world. Together, they forged the stones as living anchors for balance, intended to harmonize celestial dreams with terrestrial reality. But their purpose was corrupted by a greed for a different kind of power, a desire not to listen, but to command. The Dissonance War was not a battle of armies, but a war of wills fought through the stones themselves, shattering their original song into the fractured whispers we hear now. This revelation did not frighten Ilara. It lit a fire within her. If the stones were born from a union of sky and earth, then their true nature was not lost, only forgotten. She looked at Kale, not as a disgraced master, but as the last person who held a piece of the old knowledge "We cannot let this be the end of the story," she said. "Your exile did not erase what you know, it only hid it. Help me find the first forge site. Help me hear the original song." Kale saw in her the conviction he had lost, and the shard's persistent whisper was a call he could no longer ignore. With a slow, deliberate nod, a fragile alliance was forged. They spent the next few days planning, using Kale's forgotten maps and Alara's shard as a compass, triangulating a location where the veil between the earth and stars was said to be thinnest. They did not know that high above, reflected in the polished obsidian scrying table of the Citadel's main hall, their every movement was being watched by a pair of cold, patient eyes. The mountain pass was a gauntlet of wind and shifting stone. Alara kept the shard in her hand, its whispers now a constant, low-frequency guide through the labyrinth of scree and shadow. Kale moved with a grudging rhythm, his eyes scanning the cliffs not with wonder, but with a deep-seated wariness. They were following a path only the shard could see, a route charted by the echoes of the first song. Without warning, the mountain groaned. A deep, grinding shudder sent a cascade of boulders tumbling from the cliff face above, a roaring avalanche of stone aimed directly at them. Alara did not freeze. Instinct took over. She slammed her palms against the nearest rock wall, her mind reaching for the deep hum within the stone, the same resonance she had used to open the archive. She did not try to stop the slide. Instead, she sang a note of deflection, a sharp, clear tone that pushed the tumbling rocks to the side, creating a pocket of safety as the world shattered around them. When the dust settled, her hands were trembling, but her breath was steady. She had not just moved stone, she had harmonized with it. Kale looked at her, his usual bitterness replaced by a flicker of something like respect. "You did not fight the mountain song," he noted, his voice quiet. "You changed its key. That is the old way." As they resumed their trek, the shared brush with mortality loosened his tongue. He began to speak of the first forgers not as distant legends, but as people. He described the star weavers, who saw time as a vast, slow melody, and the earth singers, who felt the planet's heartbeat as a constant, grounding rhythm. Their union was not just a merger of skills, but a marriage of perspectives. The Palantri were to be the children of that union, created to ensure the dreams of the cosmos never forgot the needs of the world below. They were meant for guidance, not governance, to listen, not to command. Hearing this, the mission transformed for Alara. It was no longer a simple quest for answers. It was a recovery of a lost philosophy, a chance to mend a fracture in the world's very soul. Their bond solidified with each step and each shared story, shifting from wary allies to a true partnership. Then, as dusk painted the peaks in violet and gold, the shard in Alara's hand flared with a sudden, aggressive light. Its gentle hum became a sharp, warning vibration that prickled against her skin. The energy was not reacting to the landscape ahead. It was reacting to another presence, another will seeking the same source. Someone else was hunting the first forge, and they were close. The riverbed stones were not worn smooth by water, but etched with intention. Alara knelt, her fingers tracing grooves carved into the rock eons ago. The shard in her palm pulsed warmly, its whisper syncing with the images emerging from the stone. Here were the star weavers, their forms depicted as constellations of light, hands extended toward the earth singers, who were shown with roots for feet and stone for skin. Their union was not a clash, but a convergence, their energies weaving together into the first Palantri. The carvings showed the ritual not as an act of force, but of profound harmony, a symphony of giving and receiving where the stones were not made, but were born. But one panel, half submerged in the silt, held a darker story. The central Palantri, once a symbol of united light, was now shown with a crack, and from that fissure spilled a formless, grasping shadow. It had no features, only a multitude of outstretched, hungry tendrils. Alara's breath caught as she deciphered the angular script beneath it. It spoke of a shadow that listens. This was not a monster of tooth and claw. It was a parasitic consciousness, born from the dissonance war itself, an entity that fed on fractured songs and amplified discord. It did not destroy the Palantri. It twisted them, turning their power inward to create echoes of control and paranoia. The warning was clear. This shadow was not gone. It was dormant, waiting within the broken stones for a new song to latch onto, a new will to corrupt. Kale's face was grim. To go forward was to risk awakening this very entity. The first forge site would be a place of immense power, a beacon that could draw the shadow's attention if their own harmony was not perfect. Every step closer to the truth was a step closer to potentially unleashing the very force that had shattered the world once before. The safe choice was to turn back, to let the old songs sleep. But as Alara looked from the carvings of beautiful unity to the warning of the shadow, her choice solidified. Turning back meant accepting that the shadow had won, that fear was the rightful ruler of their future. "We have to try," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The shadow exists because harmony was broken. Maybe the only way to truly defeat it is to remember how to sing the first song again. Their decision resonated with the land itself. As they committed to the path, the carvings seemed to glow faintly, the river's murmur shifting into a gentle, guiding hum. The ancient stone map pointed them toward a narrow pass that led into a valley perpetually shrouded in a thick, silver mist. It was a place that swallowed light and sound, a perfect hiding place for a forgotten beginning or a patient end. They entered the mist without another word, the world narrowing to the few feet of ground they could see, and the persistent, hopeful whisper of the shard in Alara's hand, a single, fragile light against the consuming silence. The silver mist clung to them like a second skin, cold and unnervingly silent. Within moments, the path behind them vanished, and the world became a shifting, formless gray. Then the whispers began, not from the shard, but from the mist itself. They were echoes of their own deepest fears. Alara saw Master Kalen's disapproving glare materialize before her, his voice accusing her of dooming their entire order. Kale flinched as the phantom forms of his old colleagues appeared, their faces etched with the disappointment that had haunted his exile for decades. These were not mere visions. They were resonant illusions, psychic traps woven from the Palantris' shattered grief, designed to break the will of any who entered. Alara's hand trembled, but she clutched the obsidian shard, focusing on its pure, unwavering hum beneath the cacophony of fear. She did not shout at the phantoms. Instead, she closed her eyes and hummed the shard's core melody, the simple, stable note of its original song. The sound cut through the illusions like a blade of light, unraveling the misty forms until they dissolved back into the silent gray. As the last phantom faded, The mist itself parted, revealing not the barren valley floor, but a staircase of pure white quartz that spiraled down into the earth. Kale stood breathing heavily, his shoulders slumped. "I led them into a trap just like this," he murmured, his voice thick with a shame he had carried for years. "My arrogance shattered a circle of singers. How can you trust me to not fail again?" Alara looked at him, not with pity, but with a clarity forged in their journey. "Your past failure taught you what not to do," she said, "but my shard just showed us what is possible. We need both truths to succeed." Her unwavering belief was a stronger magic than any illusion. It lifted the heavier weight from Kale's spirit, the weight of his own self-judgment. He nodded, a new resolve hardening his features, and together they descended the glowing stairs. Their success, however, came with an unintended price. The moment Alara's pure note dispelled the final illusion, a deep, resonant chime echoed through the valley, a sound that vibrated in their bones rather than their ears. It was not a welcome, it was an alarm. High above, in a secluded chamber where light seemed to die, a figure stirred before a dormant obsidian plinth. The surface of the stone flickered, then ignited with a scene from the valley, two figures descending a quartz stair. A long, pale finger reached out and traced their image, a silent promise of an end to their search. The watcher was now awake. The quartz staircase ended in a cavern, so vast its ceiling was lost in a darkness that swallowed their light. They stood in a city of ghosts, a ruin of crystalline arches and toppled towers that hummed with a low, sorrowful energy. It was Kale who saw it first, a flicker of motion in the periphery where no motion should be. A figure stood atop a broken archway, silhouetted against the faint glow of the moss below. It was tall and utterly still, its form seeming to drink the light around it, clad in shadows that clung like a second skin. It moved with an unnatural silence, a gliding step that made no sound on the ancient stone. "Do we face it or flee?" Alara whispered, her hand tightening around the warm shard. Kale's eyes were narrowed, his old instincts screaming. "It is a guardian," he murmured. "It does not breathe, so it cannot be reasoned with. It is a will-given form, a sentinel left here to ensure no one ever completes the journey we are on. To confront it directly would be a battle we cannot win, but to run would only lead it to the very heart we seek to protect. So we do not run," Alara said, an idea forming as she watched the distant figure. "We invite it in." Her plan was a desperate gamble. They would use the shard's own energy as a lure, creating a resonant echo powerful enough to draw the Guardian's attention, while they found another path deeper into the ruins. She placed the obsidian shard in the center of a small, open plaza, and with Kale's help, they surrounded it with a ring of conductive crystals, tuned to amplify its song. Then they retreated into the skeletal remains of a nearby tower, their own breath held as the shard's hum grew into a clear, piercing beacon. It worked too well. The Guardian did not simply approach. It phased through a solid wall of crystal, its form flowing like black smoke to stand over the shard. It did not touch the stone. Instead, it tilted its head, as if listening, and then it turned its featureless face directly toward their hiding place. The shard was not just bait. It was a mirror, and the Guardian had seen their reflection in its power. Their trap had revealed their position, not concealed it. The conflict was no longer a matter of stealth. It was a chase. The Guardian moved with terrifying speed, its silent pursuit forcing them to scramble deeper into the crystalline city, away from their planned route and into the ruins' most unstable and forgotten sectors. They were not just being hunted, they were being herded, driven toward an unknown end by an opponent that knew this labyrinth far better than they ever could. Every choice was now a reaction, and every shadow seemed to hold its patient, silent gaze. The chase ended in a cavern that felt more like a cathedral. This was the heart of the first forge, a vast, circular chamber where the air itself was thick and heavy with ancient power. The walls were not carved but grown, swirling with veins of crystal that pulsed with a slow, sleeping light. Scattered across the floor, half buried in glittering dust, lay the tragic remains of other Palantri. These were not mere shards, but large, broken pieces of the original stones, their surfaces clouded and silent. Ilara's own shard flared with such intensity, it nearly slipped from her sweating palm. Its hum, now a resonant chord that vibrated in their bones. It was calling to the others. There was no time for caution. With the silent Guardian closing in, this was their only chance. Ilara knelt in the center of the chamber, placing her shard before her. She closed her eyes, letting its song fill her mind, and then she began to channel its energy into the forge itself. It was like trying to divert a river. The power that flowed through her was immense, a torrent of pure resonance that made the very air shimmer. All around her, the scattered fragments of the other Palantri began to glow, each one lighting up like a star rediscovered. A chorus of whispers rose from them, tentative at first, then swelling into a symphony of lost voices remembering how to sing. But the cost was immediate and brutal. Ilara gasped, her body trembling as the energy poured out of her. The color drained from her face, and she slumped forward, barely able to keep her hands on the shard. She was a conduit, and the forge was drawing from her very life force to reawaken. Kale watched in dawning horror, the truth striking him with the force of a physical blow. The scrolls had spoken of purity of heart, but he had always thought it a metaphor. Now he saw it was a literal, physical requirement. The stones responded not to strength, but to selflessness. They required a shaper who would give of themselves without seeking to take, whose will was aligned with harmony, not control. Ilara's willingness to sacrifice herself for a forgotten song was the very key. But the key was breaking in the lock. Her strength was failing, and if the channel broke now, the backlash could shatter every awakened fragment in the chamber. The beautiful rising chorus of the stones began to falter, the light flickering as Ilara's focus wavered, and then the Guardian was there. It phased through the solid crystal of the far wall, its shadowy form coalescing into a sharp, menacing silhouette at the chamber's entrance. It had heard the song, it had found its source. The final confrontation was no longer a matter of if, but of how many seconds they had left. The Guardian did not attack. It simply stood at the chamber's entrance, its silent presence halting the very air. Then it spoke, its voice not a sound that traveled through the air, but a resonance that formed directly in their minds. "I am Valerius," it intoned, a name that was a ghost in the old scrolls. "I was a forger. I helped sing the first stones into being. I also helped shatter them when I saw how their power could be turned to a single, terrible will." Fear made me their jailer. I have waited here for an age, ensuring no one would ever wield this power again. Its form shifted, the clinging shadows receding slightly to reveal the faint, grief-etched lines of a face that had witnessed the dissonance war. It was not a monster. It was a monument to regret, its gaze fixed on Alara, who still trembled from the effort of channeling the forge. You seek to reawaken what I helped bury. You must prove you are not a new instrument of control, but a vessel for the old harmony. You will face a trial of resonance. It gestured, and a single, rough piece of obsidian, unsung and dormant, rose from the floor to hover before Alara. Shape this, not with your will, but with its own song. Find the note sleeping within it and help it find its voice. If you impose your own desire, if a single thread of doubt or ambition enters the melody, you will fail. And I will silence your shard forever. Alara's strength was nearly gone. Her hands shook as she reached for the raw stone. Every instinct as a stone shaper screamed to command it, to carve it, to force it into a useful shape. That was the way she had been taught, but that was the path of control, the very path that led to the dissonance. She closed her eyes, letting her awareness sink into the stone. She did not push her energy into it. Instead, she listened, tuning her own spirit to its silent, latent frequency. It was like trying to hear a heartbeat through a wall of stone. Her own fear was a roaring static in her ears. She felt the pressure of Valeria's gaze, the weight of Kale's hope, the terrifying fragility of her own life force. For a moment, the noise was too much, and the stone in her hands remained cold and inert. Then she remembered the Star Weaver and the Earth Singer in the riverbed carvings. They had not commanded, they had converged. She let go. She stopped trying to be the singer and instead became part of the song. Her breathing slowed, her fear receded, and she became an open channel, not for power, but for presence. A single, pure tone, faint as a dewdrop, began to hum from the core of the obsidian. Then another note joined it, and another, weaving into a simple, beautiful chord. The rough stone did not change its shape. It began to glow from within, its surface smoothing as its own intrinsic music filled the chamber. She had not shaped it. She had helped it remember how to sing. The light from the newborn Palantri washed over Valerius. The last of the shadows melted from his form, revealing not a fearsome sentinel, but a weary, ancient man. His mental voice was soft, filled with a sorrowful awe. I have not heard that song since the world was young. You have the purity the first forgers intended. The covenant is safe in your hands. I stand down, but as the tension broke, Alara collapsed, the last of her energy spent. The newly awakened stone fell dark, clattering to the floor beside her. Kale rushed to her side, but Valeria's warning echoed in the sudden silence. My vigil ends, but the danger does not. Other ears have heard this awakening. There are those who still crave the Palantris power, not for harmony, but for dominion. They will come for her now. They will come for the song. The newborn Palantris light was a fragile dawn in the cavernous chamber. Its soft hum echoed the rhythm of Alara's own heartbeat as she lay exhausted on the cold stone floor. Kale helped her sit up, his hands steadying her trembling form. Her gaze, however, was fixed on the small, glowing stone she had just awakened. It felt like a child, a being of pure potential, and its whispered secrets were not words but feelings, impressions of distant nebulae and the slow, patient spin of galaxies. That simple success ignited a deeper, more audacious idea. If she could awaken a sleeping stone, could she mend a broken one? The largest fragment from the scattered remains called to her, a jagged piece of crystal that had once been the heart of a great Palantri. Its song was a sorrowful, fractured thing, and she felt a profound need to make it whole again. Drawing on the forge's lingering energy, and guided by Valeria's silent, watchful presence, she began. This was not a shaping of physical form, it was a weaving of resonance. She sang to the fractured pieces, her voice a delicate thread, stitching the broken notes back into a coherent melody. She did not force her own will upon it. Instead, she offered her intentions like gifts, weaving threads of protection, clarity, and connection into the very fabric of its light. The crystal fragments stirred, drawn together by her song, fusing not with a flash of power, but with a deep, resonant chime that felt like a sigh of relief. The newly reforged Palantir was no larger than her fist, but it pulsed with a steady, vibrant light, its whispers now a clear, confident stream of cosmic knowledge. For a glorious moment, it was perfect. Then the chamber grew cold. A dissonant vibration, sharp and oily, slithered through the air. It was not a sound, but a sensation of wrongness, a corrupting influence that sought the stone's open, trusting frequency. It twisted the beautiful whispers, turning secrets of star birth into visions of supernova and cosmic decay. The light of the Palantir flickered, its pure white glow tinged with a sickly green. Valeria's form tightened, his voice a sharp warning in their minds. It is the echo of the shadow that listens. It has found a new instrument to play. They had to act immediately. A direct confrontation with this formless hunger was impossible. Their only choice was to deny it its prize. Kale, thinking with the old, tactical part of his mind, grabbed a blank, unsung stone from the floor and channeled a burst of raw energy into it. It flared with a brilliant, aggressive light, a perfect decoy. As the corrupting presence lunged for this false beacon, Ilara clasped the true, reforged Palantir to her chest, shrouding its light and song with her own body and a hastily woven net of silence. The danger had just escalated exponentially. They were no longer just seekers of lost knowledge. They were now guardians of a relic that a malevolent force actively hunted. Hiding the stone was only a temporary solution, a single breath held in a room filling with water. They had to move, looking at each other, a shared resolve passed between them, solid and unbreakable. They would not wait to be found. They would find the other fragments before the corruption could, gathering the scattered pieces of the old song to build a harmony strong enough to silence this ancient threat forever. The air outside the forge tasted of rust and decay. A dark energy, a palpable stain, born from the original shattering, had begun to seep into the world. Where they walked, vibrant mosses shriveled into black dust, and ancient stones split with sharp, painful cracks. The land itself was weeping, guided by the reforged Palantir's pure hum, a stark counterpoint to this spreading sickness. Ilara and Kale followed the trail of blight to a nearby cavern. Its entrance was a wound in the mountainside, weeping a thin, oily mist that smelled of old sorrow. Inside, the source of the corruption pulsed like a diseased heart. A single, twisted fragment of a Palantir, no larger than a fist, was embedded in the cavern wall. It was not dormant. It was actively feeding, its dark light throbbing in time with their own rising dread, drinking their fear and amplifying it back at them in a suffocating wave of despair. "Do not fight it," Kale warned, his voice strained as he fought to shield his own mind. "It feeds on resistance. It wants your anger, your fear. To cleanse it, you must offer it something it cannot consume." Ilara knew he was right. A direct attack would only make the fragment stronger. She closed her eyes, letting the despair wash over her without clinging to it. She did not build walls. Instead, she opened herself completely, allowing her own deep well of empathy to flow outward. She did not send thoughts or words, but pure feeling, a profound understanding of the fragment's pain. She showed it the memory of its own creation, the beautiful song of its birth, and then held space for its immense, lonely grief at being so broken and twisted. It was like trying to calm a terrified animal with only the warmth of her hands. The corrupted stone recoiled at first, its dark light flaring in defensive anger. But Ilara held steady, her compassion a silent, unwavering beacon. Slowly, agonizingly, the sharp edges of its despair began to soften. The oily mist in the cavern thinned. The stone's painful throbbing eased into a slow, weary rhythm. A single, clear note, long buried under eons of hatred, chimed softly within the fragment. It was a memory of light. In that moment of connection, as the corruption receded, Ilara felt a flicker of something else within the stone. It was not just a mindless force. It was a sentient presence, sharp and cunning and deeply ancient. It had not just been feeding, it had been watching, it had been learning from them. And as her empathy revealed the fragment's true nature, the corruption revealed its own. It now knew the unique resonance of her spirit, the signature of her power. It had marked her. The cleansing was a victory, but it came with a terrifying cost. They were no longer just hunters. They were the hunted, pursued by an intelligence that understood their deepest strengths and weaknesses. "We cannot face this alone," Kale said, his face ashen. "This is a shadow that remembers the first war. We need the wisdom of those who began the song, not just those who tried to mend it. We must find the descendants of the star weavers." The sky above the plateau was a tapestry of impossible clarity, each star a needle of cold, brilliant light. Ilara and Kale had climbed for days, their breath pluming in the thin air, guided only by the silent pull of the reforged Palantri. The paths were not merely steep, they were treacherous, shifting underfoot, as if the mountain itself tested their resolve. One misstep meant a fall into a chasm that swallowed all light. They arrived at the summit not as conquerors, but as humble petitioners, their bodies weary but their spirits sharpened by the journey. A ring of standing stones stood against the star field, and within it, figures waited. They were the star weavers, their forms seeming woven from starlight and shadow, their eyes holding the deep, patient chill of the void. They did not speak. They simply watched, their silence a barrier as formidable as any wall. Ilara knew words would be useless. Instead, she drew the reforged Palantir from its protective wrappings. She did not hold it out as an offering or a tool. She simply let it rest in her open palm, allowing its pure, harmonious hum to fill the silent space between them. The star weavers remained still, but the air changed. The oppressive silence softened into a listening quiet. One of them, an elder whose hair flowed like a silver nebula, finally stepped forward. Her voice was the whisper of solar winds, We gave up the great songs. We watched as your kind turned harmony into a cage. Why should we risk the little silence we have left? Ilara met her gaze, the Palantir's light reflecting in her eyes. Because the cage is breaking, and what is escaping will not distinguish between starlight and earth song. It will consume all music. The elder's eyes narrowed, and she reached out a hand, not to take the stone, but to feel its resonance. Her fingertips hovered just above its surface. A slow, wondrous smile touched her lips. It has been a long age since I felt a song so selfless. You have not commanded this stone. You have befriended it. This changes everything. With that acceptance, the Star Weavers opened their knowledge to her. They taught Ilara that the Palantri were never meant to be static tools. They were living instruments that needed constant tuning to the slow, grand motions of the cosmos. Under their guidance, she learned to read the celestial patterns, to align the stone's resonance with the birth of stars in distant nebulae and the gentle pull of orbiting moons. It was not about controlling the heavens, but about listening to them, about making the stone a faithful echo of the universe's own endless melody. This alignment amplified the Palantir's power exponentially, but the Star Weavers delivered a sobering warning. You are not just tuning a radio to a silent frequency, the Elder explained. You are broadcasting a pure signal into a realm full of static. The source of the corruption, the shadow that listens, will hear this clarity as a challenge. It will gather its strength for a final confrontation. You have lit a beacon, and it will draw the storm. This alliance did not bring comfort. It brought a grim, necessary weight. Ilara felt her resolve harden like cooled magma. She was no longer a lone apprentice, chasing a whisper. She was part of a covenant, a thread in a tapestry that was being violently torn. But as their collective light grew brighter, so too did the attention of the darkness. The corruption now knew where to find them, and it would not be coming for just a stone. It would be coming for the singers themselves. The planetary alignment was not a distant event, but a pressure building in the air, a tightening chord in the symphony of the cosmos. Under the Star Weaver's silent tutelage, Ilara learned to feel its approach not with her eyes, but with the Palantir's core. The ritual required absolute precision. She had to stand at the exact center of the stone circle, her own emotional state a tuning fork for the immense energies about to converge. Any spike of fear, any flicker of doubt, would warp the resonance. As the first of the three sister planets crested the horizon, she began the song, her voice a fragile thread weaving into the Palantir's growing light. The second planet joined the alignment, and the energy surged, a river threatening to overflow its banks. Ilara's focus wavered for a single, catastrophic second, a memory of the corrupting shadow flashing in her mind. The pure light of the Palantir twisted, flaring a violent crimson. The backlash was immediate and physical, a wave of scorching heat that threw her backward and cracked the stone beneath her feet. She was falling, the harmonious song shredding into a scream of raw power. It was Kale who moved without thought. He did not try to counter the energy. He threw himself into the chaotic flow, his own voice rising in a stabilizing chant, a grounding rhythm of earth and endurance that he had spent a lifetime repressing. He became a lightning rod for the misaligned force, channeling the destructive surge away from Ilara and into the bedrock below. The mountain shuddered, but the Palantir's light stabilized, settling back into its steady hum. Ilara lay gasping, her body aching, but her gaze locked with Kale's. In that shared, breathless moment, the last vestiges of student and master, of wary allies, dissolved into unshakable trust. As the third and final planet slid into place, the fully realized alignment focused the Palantir's power into a blade of pure insight. The light did not simply glow, it projected. A shimmering map of the world materialized in the air before them, and upon it, a single point pulsed with a sick, voracious darkness. It was not a random fragment of corruption. It was the source, the heart of the shadow that listens, festering within the ruins of a forgotten citadel that had once been a bastion of the first forgers. The stars themselves seemed to whisper a final, urgent warning. This convergence was not just an opportunity, it was a deadline. The same celestial dance that granted them this vision was also strengthening the enemy, feeding the corruption for a final, decisive struggle. Their journey was no longer a search. It was a race against the heavens, a desperate pilgrimage to the place where the world's song had first been broken. The citadel was a scar against the sky, its once proud spires bent into hooks of blackened crystal. A palpable aura of wrongness pulsed from its walls, a silent hum that made the teeth ache and the spirit flinch. This was not a ruin sleeping in peace. It was a wound that was still alive, and it knew they were coming. The very ground before the main gate was a web of resonant traps, invisible snares designed to unravel a mind with amplified fears and phantom pains. To walk forward blindly was to invite madness. Ilara raised the reforged Palantir, its light a small, defiant sun in the oppressive gloom. She did not push its radiance outward. Instead, she let it resonate, tuning its frequency to the hidden patterns of the land. Where the corruption had woven lies of solid ground, the Palantir's light revealed crumbling bridges over bottomless chasms. Where it projected illusions of safe, open courtyards, the truth was a forest of razor-sharp crystal shards. They moved as a single entity, a fragile alliance of earth, star, and human will, stepping only where the pure light showed the way. Their progress was a delicate, terrifying dance. Kale's knowledge of old structures helped them anticipate the flow of defensive energies, while the Star Weavers read the subtle shifts in the ambient light, predicting the trap's rhythmic cycles. But the corruption was learning, adapting its assaults to their unique strengths. A particularly vicious resonance trap flared to life, not targeting them with fear, but with a crushing wave of apathy, a psychic void that sought to extinguish their will to continue. It was a brilliant, insidious attack, aiming not to break their minds, but to make them simply not care enough to go on. For a moment, their collective resolve wavered, the light of the Palantir flickering. It was then that the eldest Star Weaver, the one who had first acknowledged Ilara's worth, moved. She did not speak a warning or a farewell. She simply stepped into the heart of the trap, her own luminous form flaring into a supernova of pure, selfless intent. She became a living shield, absorbing the full force of the apathetic wave, her light burning it out of existence. The cost was her own dissolution, her essence scattering into a final, silent chord that hung in the air for a heartbeat before fading. Her sacrifice shattered the trap and the group's hesitation in the same instant. The loss was a cold knife in all their hearts, but it forged their purpose into something unbreakable. They reached the citadel's main gate, a vast archway that seemed to swallow the light. The Star Weaver's sacrifice had created a temporary breach in the Citadel's defenses, a window of clarity. Ilara, her voice steady despite the grief tightening her throat, directed the remaining Star Weavers to project a cord of focused starlight against the dark crystal. Kale anchored the resonance to the deep, unyielding bedrock below. With the Palantri as their conductor, their combined energies struck the gate. There was no explosion, only a deep, resonant chime that seemed to cleanse the very air. The blackened crystal of the archway turned transparent, then vanished, not shattered but harmonized out of existence. They stepped across the threshold, leaving the twisted sky behind. The air within was thick and cold, humming with a singular, malevolent consciousness. They stood in a cavernous, circular hall, and at its center, pulsing like a black sun, was the heart of the corruption. It was not a monster, nor a twisted palantir. It was a perfect sphere of absolute silence, a void that was actively drinking the light from the room, the sound from the air, and the hope from their hearts. This was the source. The shadow that listens had been waiting for them, and its audience chamber was ready. The sphere of silence at the center of the hall was not an empty space, but a presence so dense it felt solid. It was the heart of the corrupted Palantir, a perfect black crystal that had inverted its purpose. Instead of broadcasting harmony, it broadcast a perfect vacuum of despair, drinking every whisper of hope and amplifying the resulting silence. From its surface, tendrils of absolute shadow detached and slithered across the floor, moving with a chilling, liquid grace. These were not illusions. They were manifestations of the Citadel's own consumed grief, given form, and a singular, predatory hunger. They flowed toward the group, and where their darkness touched, the very light died. Ilara did not hesitate. She thrust the reforged Palantir forward, not as a weapon, but as a source. Its pure light flared, and she wove that radiance into a shimmering, domed barrier around them. The shadows struck the light with a soundless impact that jolted through her entire body. Each collision was a drain, a cold siphon on her will and the stone's energy. She could feel the barrier thinning, the light fraying at the edges under the relentless, silent assault. Within the safety of the flickering dome, Kale watched the shadows and saw the ghosts of his own past. He saw the faces of the singers he had failed, their disappointment mirrored in the shifting darkness. The old shame rose in his throat, a bitter taste that urged him to retreat, to concede that he was not meant for such a pivotal moment. But then he looked at Ilara, her face strained with the effort of holding back the tide, her faith in him absolute even now. His past failures were not a chain, but a lesson. He had run from consequences before. He would not run from this. Stepping forward, he placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder, his own grounding energy flowing into her. "I am here," he said, his voice cutting through the psychic static. His simple, steadfast presence was an anchor, and the barrier solidified, its light burning brighter and pushing the shadows back a precious few inches. But the reprieve was temporary. The moment their defense strengthened, the central corrupted stone pulsed with a deeper darkness. The Star Weavers cried out, a chorus of mental anguish, as the void began to actively drain their celestial light, pulling threads of starlight from their very forms. To attack the heart directly with pure force would be to shatter it, and they all felt the terrifying truth. A stone of this size, holding so much twisted energy, would not simply break. It would detonate, unleashing a wave of psychic annihilation that would scorch the land for miles, leaving behind a permanent desert of silence. Destroying it was not a victory. It was a final, desperate act of mutual destruction. They had to find another way. They had to calm the storm, not detonate the bomb. The corrupted Palantri had to be healed. Its inverted song turned right side, out again, a task that felt like trying to reason with a hurricane. Every instinct screamed for a final, explosive confrontation, but their only true path to victory was one of infinite patience and profound compassion. Ilara's plan was not one of force, but of surrender. She proposed a resonance transfusion, channeling the collective harmony of every pure Palantri they had into the corrupted heart, not to shatter it, but to remind it of its original song. The risk was absolute. The conduit for such a flow would be exposed to the full fury of the inverted energy, a torrent that could unravel a soul. Before she could even finish the thought, Kale stepped forward. "I will be the anchor," he said, his voice calm and final. His trust in her was a solid thing, unshaken by the chaos whipping around them. There was no time for debate. As the star weavers wove a lattice of starlight to contain the volatile energies, Ilara and Kale began. He placed his hands on the corrupted sphere, an act of profound courage, while she stood behind him, the reforged Palantir glowing in her hands as she connected it to the other awakened stones. The moment the channel opened, the dark energy roared. It was a storm of silent screams and biting cold, a vortex of ancient grief that tore at Kale's spirit. He did not fight it. He stood firm, a bastion of hard-won humility, allowing the pure harmony from Ilara and the stones to flow through him and into the corruption. The transformation was agonizingly slow. The black crystal resisted, its surface rippling like oil, but the relentless current of remembered music began to work. A single, clear note pierced the silence, then another, a melody lost for eons fighting its way back to the surface. The corrupted sphere shuddered, its darkness thinning, becoming translucent, then flooding with a soft, internal light. The purification was complete. The malevolent presence vanished, leaving behind only a humming, serene Palantir, but the cost was written in the aftermath. Kale collapsed, his form gaunt and his breathing shallow, his life force nearly spent in holding the line. Around them, several of the lesser Palantri, overtaxed by the immense effort, cracked with sounds like breaking hearts, their light fading to a dim flicker. Victory had been achieved, but it was a fragile, wounded thing. Then the citadel, its dark heart now still, began to die. The great hall groaned, and cracks shot up the walls. Crystalline structures that had stood for millennia shattered, raining glittering dust, as the mountain itself rejected the healed wound within it. They had to move, and they had to move now, carrying both a renewed hope and its terrible price with them as they fled the crumbling darkness. Dawn broke over the mountains as they stumbled from the citadel's mouth, the purified Palantir cool and silent in Ilara's arms. The air no longer tasted of rust, but of clean stone and the first hints of rain. They found a sheltered overhang, and under the Star Weaver's luminous care, Ilara tended to Kale. His body was a map of exhaustion, but his spirit, once burdened by regret, now rested with a quiet dignity. The Star Weavers did not speak of their lost elder, but their light pulsed in a slow, respectful rhythm, a celestial honor guard for the bravery they had witnessed. Ilara looked at her own hands, no longer just the tools of a stone shaper, but instruments that had channeled the very music of creation. The reckless apprentice who had crept into the vaults was gone, replaced by a guardian who understood that true power lay not in command, but in compassionate listening. The world itself seemed to breathe easier, the oppressive hum of corruption replaced by a deep, terrestrial quiet. Yet this very silence was unsettling. The constant, guiding whispers of the Palantri were gone. The stone in her hands was whole, its light serene, but it offered no secrets, no melodies. It was like a library whose books were all perfectly preserved, but whose pages were blank. This void felt less like peace and more like a held breath, a sign that the world's song, though cleansed, was not yet fully restored. The healing was incomplete. Gathering their few belongings and supporting Kale between them, they began the long walk home. They carried no trophies, only the weight of their shared loss and the profound responsibility of the silent stone. The path back was different, not just in the cleansed landscape, but in their perception of it. Every rustle of leaves, every trickle of water, felt like a note waiting to be rejoined to a greater chorus. They were returning not to the citadel they had left, but to a future they now had to help sing into being, one quiet step at a time. The village gates stood open, but the silence that greeted them was heavier than any lock. Faces peered from doorways and windows, etched with a wariness that had not been there when Ilara left. Whispers trailed their slow walk through the main path, a mix of awe at their survival and fear of the serene, glowing stone Ilara carried. The world was healed, but trust was a far more fragile thing to mend. Some rushed forward to help support Kale, their hands gentle, but their eyes flickering with unanswered questions. Others hung back, their arms crossed, watching the Palantir as if it were a serpent coiled to strike. That evening, in the central square, the division became a chasm. An elder named Corwin, his face a roadmap of old fears, stood before the gathered crowd. "We have lived in peace without the old magic," he declared, his voice trembling not with age, but with conviction. "You bring the very thing that broke the world back to our doorstep. How can we know it will not hunger again?" Ilara felt the weight of every gaze. She could recite the history from the scrolls, speak of the dissonance war and the nature of the corruption, but words would not be enough. The community needed to feel the truth, not just hear it. She looked past Corwin to the eastern fields that had lain blighted and fallow for a generation, a lasting scar from the long shadow of the Palantri. Her answer would not be an argument, it would be an offering. The next morning, she walked to the edge of the dead field, the entire village trailing behind her in a silent, skeptical procession. She did not raise the Palantir with ceremony. She simply knelt in the cracked, gray earth, placing the stone gently on the ground before her. Closing her eyes, she let her awareness sink into the field's deep, weary song. She felt its grief, its exhaustion from years of being unable to sustain life. Then she began to hum, not a song of command to make the field grow, but a melody of empathy, a resonance that acknowledged its pain. The Palantir glowed in response, its light spreading over the hard ground, not as a blaze, but as a gentle, morning warmth. The energy did not force the soil to change. It invited it to remember what it was, a single green shoot pushed through the crusted earth near her knee, then another and another, until a wave of vibrant life rippled outward, grass and wildflowers blooming in a silent, breathtaking rush. The gasps from the crowd were not of fear, but of wonder. The field, restored, was a testament more powerful than any speech. It was proof that the stone's power was not about dominance, but about nurturing, about listening to a need and answering it with harmony. Corwin, who had stood rigid with doubt, slowly knelt and touched a newly sprung blossom, his stern face softening into an expression of profound relief. The mending of the field mended the community. The suspicion in the air dissolved, replaced by a cautious, growing hope. Ilara was no longer the reckless apprentice, or even just a returning hero. She had become a bridge, a leader who understood that true strength lay in healing. Yet that night, as she sat in the quiet of her room, the Palantri resting beside her, a new sound threaded through the silence. It was not the desperate whisper of a broken shard, nor the malevolent hum of corruption. It was a soft, questioning murmur, like a friend speaking in the next room. The stone was not silent anymore. It was asking her to listen to a question she could not yet hear, about a journey that was clearly not over. The Palantir's murmur was no longer a question, but a chorus. The purified stone hummed on Ilara's work table, its light pulsing in a soft, steady rhythm. Beside it, the few other fragments they had saved from the citadel began to glow in sympathetic answer, their whispers weaving together into a tapestry of sound and image. Ilara saw flashes of sunken cities where coral-encrusted stones rested on ocean floors, of windswept deserts where a single shard lay half-buried under endless sand, and of bustling, forgotten markets where a piece was traded as a mere trinket, its true song silenced. The visions were not just of stones, but of people. She saw a cartographer in a high library, tracing star charts that shimmered with latent energy, and a sailor navigating by a melody only she could hear. These were not just lost artifacts. They were lost allies, scattered voices in a world that had forgotten how to listen. The stones were not simply whispering. They were calling out to each other, seeking reunion. Kale watched the luminous display, his strength slowly returning, but his expression was grave. He understood before she even spoke. This was not a conclusion. It was a summons. To leave the fragments scattered was to leave the world's song unfinished, a symphony with its most vital instruments missing. It made their victory over the corruption feel like a single battle in a war they had only just discovered. The quiet peace of the village was an illusion. True safety could only be found in wholeness. Ilara met his gaze, the weight of this new understanding settling upon her. "We have to find them all," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We have to help them remember each other." Kale's nod was slow, a gesture of resignation and resolve. He had spent a lifetime running from the legacy of the Palantri. Now he would help gather its pieces. Their new quest would not be a secretive search in forgotten ruins. It would be a pilgrimage across the known world, a mission to listen for whispers on the wind and in the hearts of strangers. They were no longer just mending broken stones. They were rebuilding a network of harmony, and the first step was to answer a call that was now echoing from every corner of the earth. The first council fire burned low, its embers mirroring the constellations wheeling overhead in the clear night sky. Ilara had called them all here, star weavers whose hair held the dust of nebulae, earth singers whose hands knew the deep rhythms of the soil, and the few human allies who had proven their trust. They sat in a circle, the very air vibrating with the potential and the peril of their shared purpose. At the center lay the purified Palantri, its serene glow a silent witness to their debate. The question was not whether to gather the lost fragments, but how to do so without repeating the catastrophes of the past. An elder earth singer, named Bram, argued for secrecy and separation, his voice a low rumble. "We must build vaults of silent stone, deep and hidden," he insisted. "Let the stones sleep where no corrupting will can ever find them." His fear was a tangible force in the circle, the memory of the dissonance war etched into the lines of his face. But a star weaver named Lyra countered, her words like chimes. "To hide them is to deny their nature. A palantir that does not sing is a heart that does not beat. It becomes an object, and objects can be stolen. They must remain connected, a chorus that strengthens itself." The tension was a tight string between past and future, between fear and faith. Ilara listened to them all, feeling the weight of the decision. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried the authority of one who had faced the void and returned. "We cannot choose between a prison and a vulnerable stage," she said. The old way was a single, dominant song that broke under its own pride. The new way must be a balance. "We need a network of guardians, not a single keeper. Each stone will have its protector, someone attuned to its unique song, and all protectors will be linked through the central palantir, sharing knowledge and strength. It is a balance of power and empathy. No one person will hold all the keys." This vision, both radical and deeply sensible, settled over the group. After a long, contemplative silence, they agreed. They would become the first Council of Guardians, a living, breathing system of checks and balances. But as the structure was accepted, a new tension surfaced. Who would lead this council? Bram and others looked to Kale, the experienced, if once fallen, master. The Star Weavers looked to Ilara, the one who had reforged the covenant. Kale, however, settled the matter with a slow shake of his head. "My role is as an anchor, not a captain," he said, his gaze meeting Ilara's. "The song answers to her." This deference did not sit well with everyone, and Ilara felt the flicker of resentment from some of the elder members. Leadership, she was learning, was its own form of resonance, and not every frequency was in harmony. To solidify their new alliance, the council turned to its first practical task. The central palantir had been whispering of a location, a place where the sea drank the stars. They focused their collective intention upon it, and the stone projected a shimmering image onto the night air, a vision of crumbling spires and swaying kelp forests, of a city sleeping beneath the waves. The next fragment was hidden in a sunken city, a place that would test their new unity before it had even truly begun. The coastal town smelled of salt, decay, and forgotten stories. Ilara stood on a crumbling stone pier, the palantir humming a low, liquid rhythm in her hands, its light pulsing in time with the distant tide. The local fisherfolk spoke of the Glimmerdeep in hushed tones, a city that had not drowned, but had chosen to sink, its people and their great palantir vanishing beneath the waves to escape the ravages of the dissonance war. It was a tomb and a sanctuary, and their fragment was calling from its silent halls. Their team was small, by design. Kale remained on the shore, his role as anchor more vital than ever, while Ilara was joined by Lyra, the Star Weaver, whose affinity for celestial currents could guide them through the abyssal dark, and Finn, a young diver whose family had passed down tales of the sunken spires for generations. The dive was a descent into another world. Sunlight faded to a deep, ethereal blue, and the pressure was a physical weight, a constant reminder of their intrusion. The Palantir's light was their only compass, cutting through the gloom to reveal the city below. Towers of white coral and sculpted stone rose from the seabed, draped in forests of kelp that swayed in the slow, cold current. Schools of silver fish parted before them like living veils. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly silent, a graveyard of magnificent architecture. But the silence was a lie. As they neared the central plaza, the water grew unnaturally still. Finn pointed, his eyes wide with alarm, to figures standing motionless among the ruins. They were the city's guardians, statues of polished basalt, their forms blurred by centuries of marine growth, but their hands were outstretched, palms open and facing upward. They were not attacking, they were waiting, dormant sentinels keyed to a specific, hostile resonance. Any hint of the old corruption, any forceful attempt to take the stone, would awaken them in an instant. Ilara's goal lay in the heart of the plaza, a single, milky white shard resting on a pedestal of woven coral. It was not broken, but whole, as if it had been waiting. She swam toward it, leaving Lyra and Finn at a cautious distance. Reaching out, she did not grasp the shard. She simply held her palm above it, and she began to hum. The sound was a vibration in the water, a thread of pure empathy. She did not ask the stone to come with her. She showed it why it was needed. She poured her memories into the water around it, visions of the purified central stone, of the Council of Guardians, of the blighted field blooming anew. She showed it a future of connection, not isolation. The milky shard began to glow, its light brightening from a dull gleam to a radiant, welcoming warmth. It rose slowly from its pedestal, floating into her open hand. Its song joined the Palantir's, a new, clear voice in the growing chorus. The harmony was beautiful, but it was also a beacon. The sudden surge of pure, awakened energy was a shock to the ancient, sleeping ecosystem. From the darkest trenches flanking the city, a colossal shape uncoiled. It was a leviathan of the abyss, a creature of scales and ancient instinct, drawn by the powerful new frequency vibrating through the water. It was not evil, merely territorial, and the song of the stones was a challenge in its domain. It surged toward them, a wall of muscle and shadow, its passage creating a whirlpool that tore at the ruins. The dormant guardians lining the plaza flared to life, not to attack Ilara, but to defend the city from the colossal intruder. Basalt fists smashed against armored hide, and the water churned with chaotic violence. "Go now," Lyra's voice echoed in Ilara's mind, a sharp command. As Finn grabbed Ilara's arm, pulling her back toward the surface, Lyra turned to face the chaos. She did not fight. She began to sing a different song, a complex melody of celestial patterns that wove a tapestry of shifting light and shadow in the water around the Leviathan. It was a distraction, a beautiful, confusing illusion that gave them the precious seconds they needed to flee. They broke the surface gasping, the newly awakened shard safely clutched to Ilara's chest. Behind them, the water boiled with the struggle before falling still once more. Lyra emerged moments later, her luminous form dimmed with exertion. They had the fragment, a vital victory. But as they looked back at the now turbulent sea, a chilling truth settled over them. The stone's awakening was not a quiet reunion. It was a clarion call, and all across the world, ancient and powerful things were beginning to stir from their long slumber. The milky shard pulsed with a cool, ancient light against Alara's palm, and as its melody entwined with the central Palantir, a vision bloomed in her mind. She was no longer in the coastal hut, but standing at the edge of a tranquil lake under a sky ablaze with unfamiliar stars. A circle of figures stood in the water, their hands linked, their voices raised not in a chant, but in a pure, wordless song that wove the very starlight into the liquid stone forming between them. This was not an act of force or will. It was an offering, a gift of harmony given to the universe, and the Palantir was born from that selfless exchange. The memory showed her that the stones were not created as tools, but as living anchors for the world's equilibrium, their whispers a constant, gentle reminder of the balance between growth and decay, silence and sound. Their purpose was to listen for the subtle tremors of discord and hum a quiet corrective, a nudge back towards harmony. This changed everything. The whispers she had chased were not echoes of a broken past, but an active, ongoing conversation with the world itself. Her role was not to be a master of the stones, but their partner, a guardian who helped amplify their quiet, balancing song. Yet within that beautiful memory, a dissonant note surfaced. The vision fractured, showing a different group, their faces sharp with ambition, attempting to seize a newly forged stone. Their song was one of command and possession, a frequency that made the nascent Palantir recoil and its light flicker with distress. The memory ended with a sharp, warning chime. This rival faction, descendants of those who had started the Dissonance War, had not vanished. They were hunting, believing the stone's power was meant to be wielded, not listened to. The race was no longer a simple search. It was a conflict between two opposing philosophies of power, and the rival seekers were already in the field, their methods swift and uncompromising. Alara now understood that every fragment they awakened was both a victory for balance and a beacon for this new enemy. They could not afford to simply find the stones. They had to find them first, and then protect them from those who would twist their gentle songs into instruments of control. The quiet work of gathering had just become a desperate shield, and the next whisper from the Palantir felt less like an invitation and more like a cry for help. The forest path ended at a circle of standing stones, but the clearing was not empty. 5 figures waited, their gray robes stark against the deep green of the moss. They did not move, yet their silence was a challenge. Alara felt the Palantir in her satchel hum, a low note of warning, a vibration of pure dissonance against the stranger's rigid stillness. The leader stepped forward, a woman with eyes like chips of flint. "We are the stewards of the final accord," she announced, her voice devoid of warmth. "We have watched your progress, Alara. You gather the old songs as if they are butterflies to be admired. This is a child's game. The world does not need another chorus. It needs a single, unwavering voice to command it. Our ancestors understood this truth. They sought to use the Palantri to end all conflict, to impose a perfect, lasting peace. Their only failure was a lack of resolve. We will not make the same mistake." Alara's own group tensed, hands drifting toward tools or readying defensive stances. But a fight here, in this sacred space, would only prove the steward's point, that power was the only true language. She stepped forward, holding up a hand to still her companions. She did not draw her own stone. Instead, she met the woman's flinty gaze. A peace built on command is not peace, Alara replied, her voice calm. It is a cage. The Palantri were born from a union, not a conquest. They answer to empathy, not force. You cannot command a heart to beat. You can only listen to its rhythm and harmonize with it. The lead steward scoffed. Empathy is chaos. It is the reason kingdoms fall and civilizations crumble. We offer order. To demonstrate, she produced a small, dark shard of her own, a twisted piece of a palantir that had been broken during the Dissonance War. She focused her will upon it, and it flared with a harsh, aggressive light, a beam that shot toward a nearby sapling. The young tree did not burn, it simply stopped. Its leaves froze mid-tremble, its vibrant green wood turning a dull, uniform gray, as if all the unpredictable chaos of life had been leached from it. See, the steward said, a cold smile on her lips. Perfect order, no growth, no decay, no conflict, just stillness. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the forest air. This was the ultimate end of their philosophy, a world petrified into silent, obedient stone. She knew then that arguments were useless. They spoke different languages. So she offered a different kind of answer. Slowly, she drew the central palantir from her satchel. She did not aim it like a weapon. She simply let it rest in her open palms, and she allowed its light to wash over the petrified sapling. The energy was not a command to live. It was an invitation. For a long moment, nothing happened. The stewards watched, their confidence unwavering. Then, a single, defiant green bud pushed through the gray bark. Then another, and another, until the entire tree was shivering back to life, its leaves rustling with a sound like gentle laughter. The palantir's light then shifted, turning inward to illuminate the stewards themselves. It did not burn them. It revealed the deep, aching fear in their eyes, the profound terror of a universe they could not control that had driven them to seek absolute dominion. Their rigid postures seemed to wilt under the gentle, unforgiving light. You hunt for power because you are afraid of the music, Alara said softly, but silencing the song will not make you safe. It will only make you alone. The lead steward recoiled as if struck, her face a mask of shattered pride. She snatched her dark shard back, its light sputtering out. This is not over, she hissed, the conviction in her voice now brittle. The stone's power is too great to be left to the whims of poets and dreamers. We will acquire them by any means necessary. With that, the stewards melted back into the forest shadows, their retreat as silent as their arrival. The confrontation was over, but the victory felt hollow. Alara looked at the now vibrant sapling, then at the worried faces of her allies. They were no longer just gatherers. They were defenders. The encounter forced a stark realization. Her network of guardians needed to be stronger, their bonds tighter. They had to share knowledge faster, protect each other more fiercely. The gentle work of listening now required the unyielding strength of a shield. And as she walked away from the clearing, the palantir's warm weight in her hand felt heavier than ever. It was not the burden of power that weighed on her, but the immense responsibility of wielding a light that could either nurture a single leaf or reveal the deepest fears of the human heart. The ritual began at moonrise, in a meadow where the air itself felt like a held breath. Ilara and her allies formed a circle around the gathered fragments, each person holding a different note, a different tradition. Lyra hummed a star weaver's cantata of cosmic drift, while Bram, the earth singer, intoned a deep, grounding rhythm from a mountain chant. Finn offered a sailing melody passed down through generations of coastal folk. Ilara did not direct them. She simply held the central palantir and wove their disparate harmonies together, letting the unique resonance of each culture braid into a single, stronger chord of sound. The fragments on the ground began to tremble, then lift, orbiting the central stone like eager moons. Their individual lights merged, not into a single blinding glare, but into a complex, shimmering tapestry of interconnected radiance. When the last note faded, a new palantir hung in the air before them, no larger than a river stone, but pulsing with a deep, assured power. It was a nexus, a stone that could now sing to its distant siblings across continents and seas, creating a web of instant communication. For a glorious moment, they stood in awe of what they had created together. That moment of triumph was their undoing. The unified energy of the ritual was a beacon the stewards of the final accord could not ignore. A sharp, discordant horn blast shattered the night's peace, and from the tree line, figures clad in gray swarmed the meadow. They did not carry conventional weapons. They held resonators, devices that emitted jagged, silencing waves meant to sever the very harmonies they had just woven. The assault was brutal and precise. One of the sonic waves struck a young star weaver who had been anchoring the ritual's celestial frequencies. He cried out, not in pain, but in horror, as the beautiful music in his mind was torn away, replaced by a screeching void. He collapsed, his connection to the stars forcibly severed. The shock of the loss rippled through the circle. Rage was a natural response, but Ilara knew it was a trap. Anger would only create more dissonance for the stewards to exploit. Instead, she clasped the new Nexus stone. She didn't try to shout down the attackers. She redirected the circle's unified energy, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The Palantir's light flared, forming a dome of pure, concentrated harmony over them. The steward's silencing waves broke against it, like rotten wood against granite, their corrosive frequencies neutralized by the collective will of the guardians. The attackers, thwarted, melted back into the shadows as quickly as they had come. The meadow was silent again, but the cost was etched on every face. They had protected the stones, but they had lost one of their own to a fate worse than death. Ilara looked from the grieving star weavers to the serene, powerful nexus in her hand. The attack was not a setback. It was a brutal lesson. The stewards would not stop, and taking their time was a luxury they no longer possessed. Every fragment left in the wild was a potential weapon for their enemies. The gathering was no longer a pilgrimage. It was a rescue mission, and it had to be completed now. The mountain peak was a needle of black stone, piercing the sky. Their journey led them to a vast, circular platform carved into the summit, its surface etched with star charts, so ancient the constellations were unrecognizable. This was the first star forge, a place where celestial dreams had once been given terrestrial form. In the center stood a massive, dormant apparatus of interlocking crystal rings, a machine waiting for a key only the heavens could provide. The Nexus Palantir in Alara's hands pulsed with an urgent, guiding light, its whispers translating the silent language of the stone. The central mechanism was a puzzle of pure astronomy, its rings aligned to capture the light of 3 specific stars at the precise moment they converged overhead. They had one night, one chance, before the alignment would not recur for another century. Under the immense pressure of the ticking cosmos, Alara's mind became an instrument of focus. She directed her allies to adjust the massive rings according to the Palantir's whispered instructions, her voice calm amidst the howling wind. Each click of a crystal into place sent a shiver of resonant energy through the platform. As the final star slotted into its designated position in the apparatus, a beam of pure starlight lanced down from the heavens, striking the central focus point. The forge roared to life, not with fire, but with a silent, brilliant inferno of woven light. The air hummed with the power of a newborn sun. Into this crucible of creation, they placed the largest recovered fragment yet, a piece of a great Palantir that had been shattered in the First War. The light embraced it, softening its hard edges, weaving its fractured song back into a coherent whole. As the new stone cooled, its surface shimmering with captured galaxies, a final, hidden inscription glowed to life on the forge's control panel. It was a warning from the first forgers themselves. The message explained that woven into the very core of each Palantir was a resonant failsafe, a self-destruct sequence. If any stone's song was ever permanently inverted toward absolute control, if it was used to dominate rather than to harmonize, its own internal frequency would trigger a cascading collapse. The stone would not merely break, it would unravel, and its dissonance would spread, dismantling every other Palantir in the network. This was not a flaw, but a final, desperate gift of wisdom. The first forgers had ensured their creation could not be turned into an eternal weapon of tyranny. The power to build also contained the seed of its own destruction, should it ever be utterly corrupted. This revelation settled over the group like a sudden frost. Their mission was now framed by a terrifying duality. Every stone they awakened strengthened their chorus of balance, but it also added another potential node to a network-wide catastrophe if their enemies ever succeeded in seizing one and twisting its heart. The beautiful song they were rebuilding was also the most delicate of triggers, and from that moment on, every whisper would be measured against the silence of absolute ruin. Alara held the chilling truth of the failsafe within her. Its purpose was not merely to destroy, but to protect the world from a tyranny of absolute harmony, a silence enforced by a single, dominant will. To activate this ultimate safeguard, however, required more than a single desperate choice. It demanded a unanimous decision from every guardian in the network, a chorus of consent to end the song forever. She brought this sobering revelation to the council, laying it before them not as a weapon, but as a sacred burden. The debate that followed was a storm of fear and principle. Some argued that such a power should be dismantled immediately, that no one should hold the key to unraveling all they had built. Others, their memories scarred by the Dissonance War, saw it as the only true guarantee against a fall into darkness, a final, merciful option if corruption ever won. The discussion circled the core issue of trust. Could they truly rely on every single member of their growing, scattered network to make the right choice under the most extreme duress? Was their unity strong enough to bear the weight of a shared trigger? After hours of tense deliberation, a fragile consensus emerged. The failsafe would remain, but its existence would be the Council's most guarded secret, known only to the innermost circle. It would be a last resort, a final echo of the first forger's wisdom, a reminder that true power was always tempered by profound responsibility. This decision, born from difficult compromise, did not weaken them. It forged a deeper, more sober unity, a covenant sealed not just in hope, but in the stark acknowledgement of their own potential fallibility. This newly hardened resolve was tested almost immediately. A messenger, his clothes torn and his face pale with exhaustion, stumbled into their camp. The stewards of the final accord had not just attacked another outpost. They had successfully captured a living Palantir. They had not shattered it. They had contained it within a cage of resonating crystal, and they were using their own dark shards to slowly, methodically, override its song. The race was no longer theoretical. The enemy now held a hostage, and with it, the first note in a melody that could end everything. The message arrived not on paper, but woven into the terrified song of a nearby river stone. The stewards of the final accord had taken Finn. They had ambushed him on a routine scouting mission, and their demand was chillingly simple. They would return the young diver unharmed in exchange for the Nexus Palantir, the very heart of their growing network. Ilara felt the ultimatum like a physical blow. To hand over the stone was to give the stewards the key to finding every other fragment, dooming the world to their sterile order. To refuse was to condemn a friend to a fate she could not bear to imagine. The weight of the choice threatened to crush her, a terrible echo of the very power struggles the Palantri were meant to prevent. Yet within that crushing pressure, a fragile idea began to form, a plan that relied not on force, but on the stone's fundamental nature. The stewards saw the Palantri as tools to be commanded. Ilara would remind them they were voices to be heard. She gathered a small, swift team and explained her desperate gambit. They would not bring the Nexus stone. Instead, they would bring several smaller, awakened fragments, and they would use their collective whispers not as a weapon, but as a symphony of misdirection. The exchange was set for a narrow canyon where sound echoed and twisted. As the stewards emerged from the shadows with a bound and gagged Finn, Ilara stood alone, her hands empty. "Your stone," the lead steward demanded, her voice sharp with impatience. Ilara simply raised a single humming shard. "It is here," she said, and she let its pure, simple note ring out. At her signal, her hidden allies, positioned at various points along the canyon walls, answered with their own stones, but they did not harmonize. Each guardian sang a different, gentle note, a cascade of conflicting frequencies that bounced off the stone walls, creating a resonant labyrinth of sound. To Ilara and her allies, it was a beautiful, if chaotic, chorus. To the stewards, whose minds were tuned only for control and singular purpose, it was psychic torture. The overlapping whispers disoriented them, clouding their thoughts and breaking their concentration. In the precious seconds of confusion, Ilara's team moved. They were not warriors, but rescuers, slipping through the sonic chaos to cut Finn's bonds and pull him to safety. The plan worked perfectly until it didn't. As her team retreated with Finn, the lead steward, fighting through the dissonance, locked eyes with Ilara. Her face was a mask of furious understanding. She saw the truth of Alara's strategy, the way she had used the stone's empathy as a shield. "You fight with ghosts and echoes," she spat, her voice barely audible over the whispering storm. "But we learn from every defeat. We now know how you think." Before Alara could react, the woman activated a device on her belt, emitting a sharp, painful frequency that temporarily silenced the nearest Palantri shards, and she melted back into the canyon's depths, a solitary figure of undiminished resolve. They had won. Finn was safe, and not a single stone had been lost. But as the last whisper faded from the air, a new kind of silence descended, one heavy with consequence. They had revealed a core tenet of their strength to an enemy that studied and adapted. The stewards now understood that the Guardian's power lay in cooperative subtlety, and the next confrontation would be designed to shatter that very cooperation. The air itself began to hum, a deep terrestrial note answering a call from the stars. Alara felt it in the marrow of her bones, a resonance that made the very light in their sanctuary seem to shimmer with anticipation. The celestial convergence was no longer a distant prophecy on a star chart. It was a palpable pressure building in the world, a tightening chord in the symphony of the cosmos. This event, a rare alignment of three sister planets, would thin the veil between the earth and the heavens, creating a moment of immense potential. It would allow them to fully reunify the Palantri network, weaving the scattered stones into a single, unbreakable chorus of balance. But that same openness would make every stone, every guardian, exquisitely vulnerable. The pure, amplified signal of their harmony would be a beacon, and the steward's corrupting influence would have a clear channel to attack. Preparation became a frantic, focused rhythm. Under Alara's direction, they fortified their mountain sanctuary, not with walls of stone, but with layers of resonant intention. Star weavers inscribed celestial patterns of protection into the crystal foundations, while earth singers hummed stabilizing frequencies into the bedrock, anchoring the entire site against psychic disruption. Every guardian, new and old, underwent rigorous training, learning to hold their note steady against waves of simulated dissonance, to maintain their inner harmony even when fear threatened to shatter their focus. It was during these drills that Alara noticed a young apprentice named Sari, her hands trembling as she tried to shield a practice stone from a projected wave of despair. Alara moved to her side, her voice calm amidst the simulated storm. "Do not fight the fear," she instructed gently. "Acknowledge its presence, then let it pass through you like a cold wind. The stone does not respond to a wall you build. It responds to the river you allow to flow." She guided Sari's hands, not to grip the stone tighter, but to cradle it, to listen for its quiet song beneath the cacophony. "Watch the stone, not the storm," Alara whispered. "Your balance is its anchor." This act of mentorship was more than just training. It was the deepening of a legacy. In Sari's eager, anxious eyes, Alara saw her own younger self, the apprentice who had once reached for a whispering shard in a forbidden vault. Now, she was the one passing on the hard-won wisdom that power was a partnership, that true strength lay in resilient empathy. Every lesson she imparted about listening, about patience, about the delicate dance between leading and following, wove another thread into the fabric of their future. It raised the emotional stakes immeasurably. This was no longer just her fight, or even Kale's. It was Sari's fight, and the fight of every young guardian who now looked to her not just for strategy, but for the philosophical core that would allow them to wield their power without being consumed by it. The air in the sanctuary thrummed with this potent mixture of hope and tension, a collective breath held in anticipation of a moment that would either crown their efforts with success or unravel everything they had built. The Nexus Palantir felt cool and impossibly heavy in Alara's lap, its light a soft, breathing rhythm in the dark of her chamber. As she fell into a deep meditation, the stone's whispers became a river, and she let herself be carried into the currents of tomorrow. Visions unfolded not as certainties, but as shimmering possibilities. In one, she saw their sanctuary bathed in a light that healed the very air, where star weavers and earth singers stood with hands clasped, their unified song coaxing new forests from barren rock and cleansing poisoned rivers. It was a world remembering how to breathe. Then the vision shattered, twisting into a landscape of terrible stillness. The same sanctuary was a tomb of gray crystal, every guardian frozen in a moment of silent agony, their faces locked in a final scream as a single, dominant note of control hummed from a corrupted stone, leeching all color and life from the world. The contrast was so visceral it broke her trance, leaving her gasping and trembling on the cold floor. She did not keep these horrors to herself. Gathering the council, she poured the visions into their minds, sharing the beauty and the terror with raw, unflinching honesty. For a long moment, no one spoke, the weight of what they had seen pressing down on them all. Then Bram, the elder earth singer who had once argued for vaults and secrecy, placed his gnarled hand flat on the central table. His voice was a low rumble, but it held no fear. "I have lived my life in the deep, quiet places of the world," he said. "I will not see them turn to silent stone. We stand together, one by one." The others added their voices, not in a shout, but in a quiet, solemn vow. They would be a wall against the silence, a chorus against the single note. Their pact was sealed not with a document, but with a shared look of profound, unshakable resolve. It was then that Kale stepped forward, his posture no longer that of a weary anchor, but of a pillar. He placed a hand on Alara's shoulder, his touch firm and steadying. "You are not carrying this alone," he said, his gaze holding hers. "My faith is not in the stone, Alara. It is in you." In that moment, the student and the master were gone, replaced by two halves of a single purpose. Their bond was a living example of the unity they were fighting for, a small, perfect harmony in the face of the coming storm. As the council dispersed to their final preparations, the night air itself seemed to thicken with whispered assurances and the ghosts of unspoken fears. Every quiet word of encouragement, every shared glance between friends, wove a fragile net of courage against the immense pressure of the dawn. They had made their choice, and now they waited for the sky to answer. The sky tore open, 3 sister planets aligned in a perfect, silent chord, and the veil between Earth and stars dissolved into a shimmering haze. At the center of the sanctuary, the Nexus Palantir blazed, its light pulling every recovered fragment into a whirling constellation of song. Alara stood within the storm of harmony, her arms outstretched, channeling the collective energy into the final, great reforging. The air itself began to crystallize around the largest shard, weaving starlight and earth song into a new, whole heart for the network. Then the stewards struck. They did not emerge from the shadows, but from the resonance itself, their gray robes materializing from the distorted air. Their leader raised a jagged, black artifact, a shard poisoned during the First War, and unleashed a wave of pure dissonance. It was not a sound, but a vacuum, a force that sought to unravel the beautiful tapestry of light. The Guardian's shield of harmony buckled, and several of the orbiting fragments flickered, their songs faltering under the assault. A fierce, silent battle erupted, a war of frequencies fought in the space between heartbeats. Ilara could not break her focus on the reforging, or the entire ritual would collapse. She saw Kale and Bram anchoring the Earth song, their faces strained as they reinforced the defensive dome. She saw Lyra and the other star weavers weaving nets of celestial light to intercept the corrosive waves, but the steward's corrupted artifacts were like drills, boring into their collective will. One of the dark beams slipped through, aimed directly at the Nexus stone. In that splinter of a second, Ilara understood that defending was not enough. They had to heal the sickness at its source. She made a choice that felt less like a decision and more like a natural step in the dance. She did not deflect the dark energy. She opened the Nexus Palantir to it, allowing a thread of that corrupting frequency to flow into the stone and through her. The pain was instantaneous and excruciating, a cold fire that sought to freeze her soul. But she did not fight it. She let it flow into the river of her own energy, and she began to sing. Her voice, amplified by the chorus of guardians and the celestial convergence, transformed the dissonance. She did not shout it down. She harmonized with its root note of fear and control, and answered it with an overwhelming wave of empathy and understanding. The pure light of the Palantir, now flowing through her as a sacrificial conduit, washed over the stewards and their dark artifacts. It did not destroy them. It illuminated them, revealing the terrified, lonely hearts beneath their fanatical resolve. Their corrupted shards did not shatter. They glowed white-hot, the darkness within them burning away in the unforgiving light, until they hummed with the same serene song as the other fragments. The leader of the stewards dropped to her knees, not in defeat, but in release, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. In that moment of perfect, unified silence, the final Palantir clicked into its whole and perfect form. A wave of absolute balance radiated outward, a gentle but unshakable force that settled into the very bones of the world. The stones, now complete, ceased their individual whispers and began to hum in perfect, seamless unison, a single chord of eternal harmony. Ilara collapsed, her body drained, every ounce of her energy given to the sealing of that covenant. But as she lay on the stone, breathing in the new, quiet world, she felt the unified whisper of the Palantri, not as a sound in her ears, but as a steady, comforting warmth in her spirit. They were no longer separate artifacts seeking connection. They were one. They were awake. A gentle light radiated from the unified Palantri, spilling from the mountain sanctuary to wash over the world in a slow, quiet tide. It was not a flash of magic, but a deep and patient resonance that seeped into the soil, mending blighted fields and coaxing clear water from long poisoned springs. The very air seemed to soften, carrying with it a sense of remembered peace. In the villages below, people who had lived their entire lives under a faint, unnameable dread found themselves breathing easier, as if a weight they had always carried had been gently lifted away. Old rivalries between star weavers and earth singers, once fueled by ancient grievances, dissolved into collaborations. their combined talents now directed toward building and healing, their work guided by the subtle, guiding hum of the stones. Ilara was celebrated as the architect of this new age, hailed as a master shaper and the first guardian of the restored covenant, yet she refused any grand title or throne. You could still find her most days in the workshop, her hands patiently guiding a new apprentice's fingers over a dormant river stone, teaching them how to listen for the music within, rather than imposing a shape from without. The great honors felt like a robe that did not quite fit. Her true work, she knew, was in these quiet moments of teaching and tending. The whispers of the Palantri were now a constant, reassuring presence in her spirit, a compass that would always point toward the next place. A gentle harmony was needed. For Kale, the new world brought a redemption he had never dared to hope for. The lines of bitterness etched on his face softened, replaced by the calm focus of a dedicated teacher. He established a school not for power, but for understanding, where he taught the complex history of the Dissonance War, not as a cautionary tale of failure, but as a vital lesson in humility. His students learned that the greatest strength was not in never falling, but in learning how to rise again with wisdom. The world, once shadowed by the echo of a broken song, entered an era of renewed hope. The Palantri did not rule from on high, but served as eternal, silent sentinels of balance. Their unified hum a reminder that the most enduring power is not found in a single, commanding voice, but in a chorus of countless different notes, all held together by the unbreakable threads of empathy and a willingness to truly listen.
you.